Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome. I'm Charles Osgood, and I was a little late getting out here because I was waiting for the bomb, 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 bomb. But this is a different world. I do want to thank you for coming today, and for those of you watching on the internet, thank you for tuning in. This is the room where I work every Sunday morning, but I have to say, I've never, in all of these years I've been doing this broadcast, I've never had so much company. Most of there's no studio audience week to week, so this is very special, very different, and very new. And I just want you to know that you are most welcome here. You're welcome to come back every week if you'd like. This is the first of what we hope will turn out to be many occasional webcasts that we've tentatively titled Later on Sunday Morning. What do you think? Now, on our regular broadcast this morning, Rita Braver did what I think was a wonderful piece about Steve Martin and his new novel, An Object of Beauty, which explores the wild and crazy world of art. We love art on Sunday morning, as you may know, if you're Sunday morning regulars. As most of you know, Mr. Martin is a true Renaissance man. Wit and wisdom combined. Comedian, movie star, actor, writer, playwright, world-class banjo player. Boy, am I jealous of that. And an all-around good guy and genius. May I proudly present my colleague, Rita Braver, and my hero, Steve Martin.
Thank you very much. No kissing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your money has already been refunded. I want you to know.
Rita, it's all yours.
Thank you, Charlie. First, I ought to say that traveling around the country, the question that I get asked most is Charlie Osgood really as nice as he seems? And you guys have seen the answer. One of the nicest people that's ever been my good fortune to work with. And I want to thank you also for coming here. It is really great to meet our Sunday morning audience, some of you at least in person. I am a little bit relieved to see that you're not wearing your pajamas, because I know that's how I always watch the show, usually from my treadmill. And as Charlie mentioned, we are so lucky to have Steve with us. Really, you know, you're here because you all know that he is one of the most talented people on the American scene in so many different
much. That's not true, but thank you.
areas. And what Charlie didn't mention, he talked about his musicianship, but he's the recent winner of a Grammy Award, among other things.
Thank you.
Plays, screenplays, all of that. Just to let you know how things are going to work, Steve and I are going to talk for a little while. Then we're going to take some audience questions that you've kindly written down on little pieces of paper for me. And then Steve is going to dive into the audience and body surf for a while. That'll go on for a while. But actually, he has been
on special underwear for that.
He's been kind enough to agree to sign some books afterwards. So folks are going to go out that way, and I'll remind you at the end. But we hope that since this is our very first foray into this, that you have as much fun as we have when we do interviews like the one we did. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that we talked about in their piece, because I know a lot of you didn't get to see that this morning. But I think we need to start out with the recent unpleasantness at the 92nd Street Y. With the caveat that we have a much brighter audience here at Sunday morning.
Well, no, the audience was not unbright. You know, it really takes me a long time to sort things out in my head, and I'm very slow to, if I've been insulted, someone says, did you know you were insulted? I said, no, I didn't. And it takes me about 24 hours to work that out. And it takes me about 36 or 48 hours. And usually I can sort things out. But the more I think about this, I become more bewildered about actually what happened, because when I first heard that the audience's money was refunded, my job is to be very critical of myself, and even while I was on stage, I was being critical of myself. Even when things are going well, I'm critical of myself as a comedian or performer. If I'm on Letterman, I'm thinking, this is okay, this is going good, but there's another reality going on inside my head. So when I heard that they had refunded the money after I landed from an airplane, so I thought, oh, I must have really been bad, and so that was their decision. But then I thought, gee, we were there for free, and the 92nd Street Y is a nonprofit organization, so we raised money for them, and I thought, how bad were we that they took charity money to give back charity money. I saw a kid going to camp, and they're going, no, the Pink Panther guy you love so much, he is keeping you from going to camp. We're taking you to the trash dump instead. So Steve Martin is the one taking you to the trash dump. So I did feel, it's, when people go to a, $1,000 a plate dinner and they have a rubber chicken, they don't go, hey, this chicken is so bad, I want my money back. But anyway, I just felt that in hindsight, we were their guests, and it was a very strange thing to do. And by the way, they have apologized, and they're very contrite about it and very decent about it. But I can't take back worldwide headlines that says I was boring. When it's out there on the internet, oh, that's so great, you apologize. I'll just take back all these 100 million hits, called me boring. And I did an op-ed in the Times today, that said, was I? Maybe, but who knows? I've heard differences of opinion, and if I was, so might have gotten better,
I'm not, having interviewed you now twice, and this is the third time, I'm not too worried about that happening. But I thought just, for the fun of it, we might start out with some celebrity chit-chat, which is apparently what they wanted.
Yes, please.
How was it to host?
Save me from this. I can feel, believe me, my mind is working right now.
How was it to host the Oscars?
Oh, it was so much fun. I tell you, I've hosted 3 times now. The first time I was by myself, and I was quite nervous. I thought, when you're standing back there alone and that curtain is about to go up, I was nervous, but I've been on stage a million times. So, when you're out there, you're fine, you're having fun. Actually, it's a very friendly audience because I knew a lot of people. I look out and there's people I know, there's directors I know, there's actors I know, and they're nervous and you sort of kid them, and it's actually quite fun. And I felt confident in the material. Second time, less nervous, but it was, oh my God, it was the night the Iraq war started.
My gosh.
And it was a very tough night. And I had experience with performing on nights of disaster. So I won't go into those stories, but so I think it went well. And then the third time, I'm with Alec Baldwin, who we get along great. And our
that was their other big question. What's Alec Baldwin like?
He is so, seriously, he is so much funnier than I am. Around a table, he's a great raconteur. He does voices, accents. He tells a story. I'm in awe of the guy. He's really, really funny. He's a sweet guy. And we have a great rapport, I think, a great comedic rapport, too, on stage. And I kept waiting for this nervousness to hit me, because it's now the third time. It never came. It was just so delightful. And, I love working with the guy. Really fun.
Okay, so now we can talk about the book, okay? And I have read it now, really, a couple of times.
I can't believe that. I can't believe
really,
it.
and it was better the second time because I got little funny, nuances. So I highly recommend An Object of Beauty. And just to get us in the mood, how about reading a little bit from it?
Oh, Okay. Well, I wrote it on a.
Oh, that's.
Oh, well, I have a. Oh, thank you.
Book you marked.
Oh,
and
thank you.
You know, before
well,
we
I have
start,
it on
this
big
is, wait
type.
a minute, don't go away. This is your chance to meet both the brains and the heart of Sunday Morning, Rand Morrison, our executive producer.
Thank you. Thank you. I put it on big type so I could read it.
Mine's bigger.
Yeah. This is actually the opening page or two of the book. I thought it's very hard to explain when you have a complicated character set in the art world in Manhattan from 1993 to 2009 to actually explain the course of a novel. So I thought I would just start at the beginning. It's probably simpler to understand what this book is about and what the central character is about. So this is not as long as it looks. It's double-spaced and big type. It's, okay, starts with the narrator. Well, I think it's self-explanatory. All right. I'm tired, so very tired of thinking about Lacey Yeager. Yet I worry that unless I write her story down and see it bound and tidy on my bookshelf, I will be unable to write about anything else. My last name is Franks. Once in college, Lacey grabbed my wallet and read my driver's license aloud, discovering that my forenames are Daniel Chester French, after the sculptor who created the Abraham Lincoln Memorial. I am from Stockbridge, Massachusetts, where Daniel Chester French lived and worked, and my parents, being parochial Americans, didn't realize that the name Daniel Chester French Franks read funny. Lacey told me that she was related to the arts by blood too, but declined to tell me the full story, saying, "Too long. Later I'll tell you, French fries." We were 20. I left Stockbridge, a town set under the glow of its even more famous citizen, the painter of glad America, Norman Rockwell. It is a town comfortable with art, although uncomplicated art, not the kind that is taught in educational institutions after high school. My goal, once I discovered that my artistic aspirations were not accompanied by artistic talent, was to learn to write about art with effortless clarity. This is not as easy as it sounds. Whenever I attempted it, I found myself in a convoluted rhetorical tangle from which there was no exit. After high school, I went to Davidson College in North Carolina, while Lacey drove north from Atlanta. And there, Lacey and I studied art history and had sex together exactly once. Even at the age of 20, Lacey's entry into the classroom had the pizzazz of a Broadway star. Our eyes followed her down the aisle, where she would settle into her seat with a practiced hair flip. When she left a room, there was a moment of deflation while we all returned to normal life. It was apparent to everyone that Lacey was headed somewhere, though her path often left blood in the water. If one of her girlfriends was in crisis, Lacey would rush in, offering tidal waves of concern. She could soothe or incite in the name of support. "Honey, get over it." Or conversely, "Honey, get even." Either bit of advice was inspiring. The emotions of men, however, were of a different order. They were pesky annoyances, small dust devils at her feet. Her knack for causing heartbreak was innate, but her vitality often made people forgive her romantic misdeeds. Now, however, she is nearing 40 and not so easily forgiven as when her skin bloomed like roses. Thank you.
So we can tell that Lacey is enticing, and yet, of course, we don't really like her very much.
Well, during the course of the book, she commits a lot of emotional crimes and actual crimes. So, you know, this type of personality, you know, I've witnessed throughout my life a lot of times in show business that people are so they're so exciting and they're so interesting, and all of us know people that you forgive and you say, "Oh, that's just Joe." And if someone else had done the same thing, you would never see them again. But certain people have a kind of charisma that they know just how far that they can go, and they know just how charming to be. And that's what this character is.
You know, you could have, as you mentioned, you knew people like that in the world of showbiz. You could have set this in showbiz, but you've written a play set in the world of art. Shop Girl had some little art mentions in it. Some of your films have little clues that you're interested in art. Why do you think that the world of art is such a good place to set a novel?
Well, I'm fascinated with the art world, but I'm not fascinated with show business. You know, I earn a living in show business, and I'm just in show business. Show business is you know, it's a kind of a working world for me. But the art world has so many elements of intrigue and, first of all, aesthetics at the highest level of art that you can never quite comprehend. You can never resolve. It's beautiful. It's everywhere you go. It's given me something to do my whole life. When I was traveling younger doing stand-up comedy, no matter where I was, I had something to do because there's a museum in every city.
And admit it, you like the sexy pictures.
Yeah. Well, art is sexy, and that it has that going for it. And so it's a fascinating world. You know, there's fakes, there's crime, there's intrigue, there's money, and it's a fascinating world to me.
One of the things that is interesting about this book, and if you haven't already read it, you'll see, is that you actually, right in the text of the book, you intersperse the paintings that are part of the action of the book. Why'd you take that tack?
Well, I didn't intend to do it, but you know, when you're writing something on a computer, it's so easy to do all of a sudden. And I was writing a very important part of the book, and there's a specific painting that is actually crucial, visually crucial. And I thought, gee, I'm working so hard to describe this painting. Why not just drop it in? Actually, a friend of mine painted it, Ed Ruscha. And so I just dropped it in. I thought, gee, it's odd just to have one painting illustrated in the book. And I started doing it, and it really saved me the trouble of being descriptive, working so hard to be descriptive of a painting, which you can never quite do. And I thought, you know, there's a great history of illustrated books, you know, through history, from illustrated manuscripts. But I don't know that a novel has been illustrated in this way.
Yeah, that wasn't a graphic novel.
Yeah, that wasn't.
Right.
Yeah, with paintings. So, and when I actually started talking to publishers, I said, one thing I want is I want the illustrations of the book, in the book, to come when they're spoken of, not you know, jammed together in the center. So as we all know what happens when you buy a book, you go, oh, you go right to the center and look at all the things. But I love that they're able to fall exactly when they're spoken of.
For somebody like me, and Charlie mentioned that we do a lot of art pieces on Sunday morning, and so I've had a chance to learn about art, but I learned a lot from this book. And I didn't know much about two of the artists, and we're going to put some of these pictures up on monitors. You talk about these two painters, William Michael Harnett and John Frederick Peto. You have his mug pipe and book, and they're a little bit of part of the action. Tell us about that in the book.
Well, the scene is where Lacey has a little business dealings with these two pictures. But you know, during the course of the book, the narrator, who wants to be an art writer, will take little excursions and give you a little art history in a paragraph or at most two. And these two painters, Harnett and Peto, are late 19th century American painters. And Harnett is the famous one. And he's very photorealistic, you can tell. In fact, and he formed a friendship with Peto. And Peto painted just like him, almost. And Harnett's pictures were very photographic. That's the Peto. And you can tell the difference between them because the Peto is much softer around the edges. And in his larger pictures, they're quite beautiful. They almost appear, the edges of the objects kind of almost float in space a little bit. They're softer. Harnett was well known. Peto was completely unknown. And during as the years went on and Harnett became very, very famous and Peto was completely unknown, fakers would take the Peto change the signature to Harnett, and they would get big money for his pictures. And then in the 1950s, a scholar named Alfred Frankenstein said, these don't look right. It seems like Harnett had two different styles, and he discovered Pito. And then Pito's prices and fame started to rival Harnett's.
You know so much about art, and it's obvious that you have so much fun. How did you first get interested in it, and when did you really start collecting? What were the first kinds of pieces you bought?
I was interested in 19th century American paintings, which includes the Hudson River School. They're these beautiful, magnificent landscapes. But I got interested in art in college. And I had a friend named Phil Carey. He was an artist. And when I was in college, it started in 1963. And 1963 was, at the tail end of abstract expressionism, which all these famous names, de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, Rothko. So they're big news. But what was happening was, then suddenly Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein were making news in New York. So there was this, and I was in Orange County, California, so this had to be big news to reach Orange County, California. And it was fascinating.
But you couldn't afford works like that at the beginning, so what'd you start with?
You have to steal. No, I couldn't buy anything. I couldn't buy anything until much later when I lucked into a job writing for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. I was 21, 22. And so I got a little bit of money, and I bought an Ed Ruscha print.
That was your very first. But
I bought a little 19.
You told me before that you originally bought some paintings where actually the frames were better than the paintings, right?
Yeah, it looked really good in the house.
There's a great line in the book that you say for some people that they just keep wanting to get the next one and the next one, and they think that art is going to complete the jigsaw of their lives.
Well, I tried to explain a collector mentality. And, some people some collectors like to have 5 or 6 very nice things, and that's fine. And some collectors like to have the quintessential collection of a certain period, of a certain movement, and they might like to have Cubism completely represented, and there are some collectors who have magnificent collections of Cubism. They might like to have, the sort of vacuum cleaner mentality. They buy tons of contemporary art. They warehouse it, and I'm not criticizing that. It's fun. They're very vital. I mean, one collector I mentioned in the book. This is a real man. I won't mention his name, but I actually cleared the story with him. He said, "Oh, please go ahead. It's fine." There's an art fair here at the Armory, Midtown, and he was so anxious to get in to see the works before anybody else could. This, by the way, is a very rich, legitimate person. He disguised himself as a janitor so he could get in the day before and go sneak around and look at the works for sale.
You let us see how Lacey falls in love with the idea of collecting. You have, and there's a Milton Avery painting.
Yes.
It's
American, painted in the sort of 30s, 40s, and 50s.
And one of my favorite painters, and so I was so happy that that was used in the book. But you have her, actually, she ends up, for reasons we won't explain, keeping it at home overnight.
She tries to deliver it in Washington, D.C., and the man can't take it for some reason. So she takes it home to her little 12th Street apartment overnight. And, it's all this, it's a little one-room apartment that a kind of student has. And it's night, and it's all in a cardboard, carrying case, and she thinks, well, it's here. I'll try and hang it. And so she takes it out, and she takes down her, little whatever frame photo or something, and hangs it on the wall, puts a lamp under it so the light goes up, opens a bottle of scotch, and she sits back, and it's her first genuine experience with an artwork. And she looks around the room, and she has this communion with this lovely thing. And she looks around the rest of her apartment, and she realizes that all the rest of it looks shabby. It looks like her past life. And she knows that she's going to move up, and she's going to now want fine things.
On the other hand, and this story that I'm going to ask you about isn't in the book, but on the other hand, the book sort of indicates that sometimes collectors can get so obsessed with collecting, they don't really care. And you told me a great story about a friend of yours who wanted the Jackson Pollock painting so badly.
Yes, and by the way, this friend is a great collector and great appreciator of art, but he says he wanted the Jackson Pollock painting for years and years, a specific one. He stalked it, and finally it came available, and he bought it, he installed it in his house, and he said, Steve, you know how long I looked at it? 5 minutes. but by the way, you know, that was a story. I know he went back to it, appreciated it, loved it, and still has it.
You talked in your autobiography, when the last time we did a piece for Sunday Morning about your stand-up career, that as a young boy you got interested in magic and performing. And I know you always wrote, especially in the early days, your own comedy sketches. Did writing of comedy come easily to you, or did you find it hard work to be funny in the early days?
No, I had to learn how to do it. There was a point where I was about 18, and I had a quasi-comedy magic show, and I got material from everywhere. I stole it, you know, I had old joke books, I had everything. And when I got to college, I started learning about poets, writers, and originality was stressed. And I had never heard of originality. I said, originality? What is that? And I looked at my act and I thought, oh no, I have to be original. or it's never going to have anything new, or it's not going to have any interest to anybody if I'm not original. So I had to take all this material that was working, thanks to other people, and throw it out. And I thought, how am I going to come up with material? So I came up with this little plan. First, I came up with a little plan to say, okay, well, I laughed in life, so I'll just make note of when I laugh, and maybe I can get some material out of it. But I also was reading, you know, my major was philosophy. I was also reading about logic, and I was reading Lewis Carroll, who was quite a logician, and he wrote funny things. I don't know how to describe it. The non sequiturs. And I got interested in that, and so I started incorporating that into my show. But, you know, as smart as you can get in comedy, you always have an audience to check you.
So if they don't laugh.
That's right. So you're always, you know, oh yeah, I'm so smart. Oh no, I'm so stupid, you know, about comedy. So you're always in check.
A lot of people don't know that some of those early props that we all laughed at so hard, like the arrow through the head, those were from the magic shop,
Yeah, I
right?
used to work at a magic shop, and you know, I viewed them as ironic. You know, it's like, it's funny, but it's not funny, and so therefore it's funny again. You know?
So when did you realize that it wasn't just comedy, that you could write essays and books, and you could start to slip a little serious stuff in?
It's so incremental, this thing. You know, I was writing my little comedy act. Then I started working for the Smothers Brothers, so I started to learn to write sketches and dialogue for sketches. And then I got into the 80s, and I thought, well, I've written sketches. Maybe I can write screenplays. So I started working on screenplays. And then in the late 80s, I thought, well, this I'm just, you know, fooling myself, really, but it works. And I wrote sketches. I written screenplays, and I performed on stage, so I know I'm used to the audience, so maybe I can write a play, because that's really what it is. It's a long bits of dialogue with an audience in mind. So I wrote a play, and then the New Yorker, well, that's a convoluted story, but I wrote a short piece for the New Yorker that was comic, so I started writing comic pieces for the New Yorker, but that's really the first prose that I started writing. Then I did a book of short funny pieces that I published in the New Yorker and added some pieces. And in that, there was something a little more, I can almost name the line that was a little more serious. And I kept waiting for somebody to say, what's this serious line? But nobody did. So I thought, you know. And then I wrote Shop Girl, which was my first serious prose
You know,
piece.
you obviously have a talent for writing and for writing long form, but what do you say to the segment of your audience that just says, no, he should just be funny all the time? He's a funny guy, let him be funny.
I just don't think about it. I mean, I think I had been lucky to have been accepted, or I don't know. I don't, you know, sometimes I hear, oh, what a blowhard. And that's from my wife.
You've said, though, that I remember you once told me that if you were the guy that, you know, say the guy in The Jerk, that you wouldn't have any friends, that people wouldn't like you very much.
Well, you know, I say, how come you're not funny off stage? Well, I am funny off stage, but I'm funny with my friends. You know, I'm not funny. I don't know.
Like you don't slip the cab driver a hand buzzer when you give him the money.
It doesn't work that way, you know.
So when you're writing and you feel like it's going and you're, you know, sitting at your computer, I mean, what's that experience like for you?
It's quite joyful to me. I know people struggle, but and I struggle too. Oh, it's going to hit me with that.
Oh,
Yeah.
my mic must have gone off.
Oh, I hear you fine. But I'm sitting here. So it's I don't, like I say, I don't earn my living from this, so I can walk away from it. And sometimes I just discipline myself and say, well, I have to finish this. I'm going to finish it now. And that sort of focus trains you to finish something, and you know, you have a set of skills, and then you have a set of inspirational tools, I guess.
Is it a different kind? Oh, sorry. Is it a different kind of pleasure when you say you know that people have laughed at one of your movies, or people tell you how funny you were on Letterman, and then when somebody says to you, "Hey, I loved your book"? I mean, is that a different kind of?
It is different. You know, in a book that somebody really spent time there, one-to-one, and they've enjoyed a particular line or moment or story. It is, yeah.
So would you rather win an Oscar or a Pulitzer?
Well, why not both? I mean,
You know, it's obvious, and we talked about this serious writing, but you see humor in so many things, including the art world. And in your book, you say, in the late 1990s, when most of the book is set, artists' work ranged from the gigantic to the minuscule. And the book includes this illustration of a Tom Friedman self-portrait carved on an aspirin.
Yes.
What are we to make of this?
Well, Tom Friedman, you know, I make the point that if the history of humor were being written, you know, it would come to a certain point, you know, with movies or different people, and it would somehow have to leap over into the art world, because here you have Tom Friedman, who's a fabulous artist and always has a sense of humor somehow in his work. And it's quite funny to think of someone carving a self-portrait of themselves on an aspirin, and it sits on it's on a wall. It's displayed on a wall. In fact, there it is. You know, and there's another artist, Maurizio Catalan, who has a sculpture of the Pope lying on the ground after he'd been struck by a meteorite. You know, it's quite funny to look at. So, you know, there he is. Yeah.
You go on and you tell us that he made this piece only a year before he convinced his gallery director to do what?
Oh, Maurizio Catalan convinced his gallery director to walk around for a month, I think it was, dressed as a bright pink penis.
And who says art's not funny? But the question is, are the artists making fun of us? Are they trying to, you know, just kid us and trick us into buying these pieces? Or is this, like humor, a commentary on life?
I've never met an artist who's trying to trick anybody. I think I've only met people who are working very hard and are very sincere. But I think sometimes the people who are outside art can look at something that they find silly or ridiculous. And by the way, sometimes it is. I mean, it's no guarantee just because it's made by an artist that it's not silly, because there's also a thing called failure, that an artist can fail, and the press loves to pick it up and maybe explode it into something silly. And sometimes it is. So, they're bad movies, they're bad art.
It's in the eye of the beholder to a certain extent, I guess.
Well, that's very interesting. It's not always in the eye of the beholder, because there's a consensus about what is good. You could say let's pick a corny. The Sistine Chapel is not in the eye of the beholder. It is guaranteed that it is beautiful. The consensus of writers, scholars, people, it's beautiful.
On the other hand, or along those lines, one of your characters, who's a very sophisticated art collector, says, and endeared himself to me in the book by saying this, "I love pictures of dogs playing poker."
Yes.
And so do I.
Well, that's spoken by a very sophisticated collector. And, the pictures of dogs playing poker were actually created by a specific artist. They've been copied a million times. But it's an enduring image. Norman Rockwell is a very fine artist, very skilled painter who created very enduring, memorable images. And, that counts too. There's no one word, no one thought that covers the entire scope of art or the art world that you can just say, this is it and this isn't.
As we mentioned, your novella, Shop Girl, was made into a film. You were one of the lead characters.
I played Shop Girl.
Now you're all going to go out, and you're just trying to boost your video sales, aren't you? Will this one be made into a film, and if so, what role would you play?
Well, I have no idea if it'll be made into a film. That takes time. You need a lot of interest. It's up to someone else to determine that. I don't know. There's a role of an art dealer in there. That's my age, so. But I don't know if the role is big enough. It depends on what. It depends on
maybe you'll get to write the screenplay. You can expand it.
It depends on what I would pay.
I asked you about writing, but why is acting still fun for you after all these years?
When I did It's Complicated, I had a small role in it, and I was walking out to the set the first day, and I'm stepping over the cables, and there's the sets. I'm walking with the back of the sets, and I thought, home. I've been doing this since the 80s, early 80s, when I did my first film, and it's really more like home than a stage is to me, even though I did that for a long time. But that was, performing on stage was, my memory is of suffering. But this, even though making movies is hard, but the actual acting and the camaraderie and the people I've met, and especially on that movie, working with Meryl Streep, Nancy Myers, the director, and Alec, was nothing but fun and laughs. I really had a good time in it. Acting opposite Meryl or Alec, it's so genuine. I had scenes with Meryl Streep where I was supposed to laugh at her because she made a joke. And I said to Nancy, I said, just so you know, I'm actually laughing at her. I'm not acting, I'm laughing at her.
When you're working on a book or when you're appearing in a movie, portraying a character, do you walk around thinking about it all the time, or do you compartmentalize?
Well, it depends. If you've got a very important scene coming up or an emotional scene coming up, you really do stay in that place. You can't just, I know some actors can do it. Michael Caine can do it. He can go, well, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. The Nazis are coming. It's just, he can do that. But I try to stay in a place. I know Meryl tries to stay in that place. It depends on the nature of the scene. If it's a light comedy, you do try to stay up, loose, and happy.
Where does music fit in all of this? When do you do it? And do you sometimes actually compose while you're working on a movie?
Yeah, there's a lot of downtime on a movie. So sitting backstage with the banjo and writing, it's the strangest thing. I played banjo my whole life, and I wrote songs early on, and there was sort of a dry period of writing, and then I started composing music again, and I did this album, The Crow, and wrote all the songs on the record, and it won a Grammy for Best Bluegrass Album, which is like, hey, you know. And I have another record coming out in March of all new songs, performing with the Steep Canyon Rangers. It's a great thrill, and it allowed me to get back.
And you just toured.
I just toured. I'm going to tour again, and it's a great thrill to go stand on stage again with the, you know, kind of the security of music, and I also perform comedy during that, because, you know, it's kind of old-fashioned. I have a sort of funny introduction to a song. You know, like one of the jokes I say is, I try to write songs based on personal experience, and this next song is called I Think My Masseuse Is Too Chatty. So, but, you know, so it's comedy and music, but, you know, I'm not on the hook for comedy all the time, because as soon as you do something funny, what's next, what's next, what's next? But with music, I was surprised to see, oh, people bob their heads, and they like listen, and they go, oh, the song's doing the work for a while.
Just because this was one of my favorite things in the book, and it has a little music in it. I think your passion for art shines through a lot in the way you talk about, and I'm going to ask you to read the passage. I think we marked it on page 126. You talk about
specific.
the painting. I told you I read the book.
Oh, but you didn't tell me you memorized it.
Yeah. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
It's a painting called El Jaleo by John Singer Sargent. And I'm just going to ask Steve to read this passage, because if you've seen this painting, I have to say, when I read his passage, I've seen this work many times, I focused on the painting in a new way.
Okay. They're at the Boston Museum. No, sorry, they're at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. In front of them was Sargent's El Jaleo, at almost 12 feet long. It had not been imagined by Lacey to be so monumental, and she felt now that as she approached it, the picture would engulf her. A Spanish dancer, her head thrown back, an arm reaching forward with a castanet, her other hand dramatically raising her white dress, steps hard on the floor. Behind, a bank of guitarists strum a flamenco rhythm that is impossible for us not to think we hear. And one hombre is caught mid-clap, a clap we finish in our minds. Another is snoring. The scene is lit from below as though by a fire, throwing up a wild plume of shadow behind the dancer. The frenzy and fever of the dance, the musicians, and the audience are palpable. I'll go one more paragraph. In Lacey, the picture aroused her deeper hunger for wild adventure that could not be fulfilled by a trip to Boston in modern times. She longed for wanton evenings spent in a different country, in a different century, her own head tilted back, flashing a castanet and a slip of leg, and sex with young men no longer among the living. Just then, Joshua leaned into her and whispered, "That dress is fantastic."
Isn't that great? I love that. It makes you really love the painting. But you also, in the book, something very provocative. You go into the kind of controversy, and we talked about this a little bit, about what is great art. And you contrast a 1909 painting by Picasso, Woman with Pears, with a Warhol, Marilyn, done in 1964.
Right.
And they're both described as masterpieces. And
I have to read again. Do you mind?
I don't know the page number of that.
Oh my God, you didn't read it that well. Okay, I will read this, and this is a shorter piece too. These two pictures, the lower one is Picasso, a portrait, and the upper one is obviously Andy Warhol, a 1963 portrait of Marilyn Monroe. Well, I'll read this description. While the Cubist Picasso had gravitas, the orange Marilyn had exuberance. It was as though a fruit-hatted Carmen Miranda had just shown up at a funeral. However opposite these pictures were, they both worked as historical objects, and they worked as objects of beauty. While the Picasso was deep and serious, the Warhol was radiant and buoyant. The Picasso added up to the sum of its parts: artistic genius combined with powerful thought, combined with prodigious skill, combined with the guided hand, equals masterpiece. The Warhol was more than the sum of its parts. Silkscreen, photo image of popular actress, repetitive imagery, The unguided hand equals masterpiece.
And you go on to say that the art you think you hate can suddenly become irresistible.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. A lot of times it takes a long time to appreciate a certain artist. I've looked at an artist for 10 years and I thought, I just don't like this artist. And then suddenly one day you go, I think I kind of do. And that's why, it's unfair, I think, sometimes for the press to jump on the press or whoever, to jump on an artist and call them ridiculous, because it does take time to look at somebody. And you have to look at it over and over. You have to see other works by the artist to get where they're coming from.
Kind of how we feel about you. And I'm going to go to your questions, and my last one is that I once read where you said that your 50s was going to be your last productive decade.
I was wrong.
Here you are, 65. Are you surprised that you're still working so hard and doing so much?
I am a bit, because this has been an odd year, because I have this novel, I have a new record, and I have a movie in the can that I'm quite proud of called The Big Year with Jack Black and Owen Wilson, and it's about competitive bird watching. Kind of makes you want to see it, doesn't it? It's so strange. I don't know what will happen after this, but this was at least 2 years in the making, and the album was at least a year and a half, and so it does go back. But
we'll be back here in a couple of years. Rand, do you have some of our audience questions? And I'm hoping I can read them without my glasses, which I forgot. Thank you. Great. Thank you. This isn't in context, but is a good question in life in general. What irritates you the most?
There is something, and I'm trying to think what it is. Oh, I have a thing that's not the most irritating thing, but I have a thing with, let's call it software, with gadgets, and I call them deprovements. And it's when they come out with the next generation that they have improved, and now it is worse than it used to be, and you can no longer use them. So that's my term for when they improve a piece of software. I call it a deprovement.
I'm going to use that.
Thank you.
I know, because you can always steal from someone, right? What inspires you? What are you watching, listening to, reading? And this is the hard one. What makes you laugh these days?
I get a lot of amusement from my friends, obviously. My good friends, Marty Short. I have my friends, Lorne Michaels. That's the greatest thing about being in comedy, is that you have funny friends. And it really makes life better, laughter. And since I've been on Twitter, I write little funny things, but the things that people write back are hilarious.
On purpose?
Yes, on purpose. The other day, I just, over this 92nd Street Y thing, I just wrote, oy vey. And then I wrote, I said, isn't oy vey the beginning of a Christmas carol? And then people wrote back things like, oy vey Maria. That was a popular one. And somebody wrote, wish I could remember her name because I didn't give her credit, was oy vey the river and through the hills to grandmother's house we go. There were hundreds of them. I wish I'd kept them. They were hilarious. And so, comedy is found everywhere. My wife makes me laugh, and I fail to make her laugh. But I love living in a comedic world.
Tell us a little bit about your wife, because you met her.
She was originally a fact checker at the New Yorker, and then she became she wrote many art reviews for the New Yorker, and she actually fact checked one of my early pieces, and she was a phone voice to me. And actually, I've never met her. We were married over the phone. And we have a communication system in the house, but I've never met her. I hear she's quite pretty.
Yeah, maybe. Next time, maybe she'll, she could be in the audience right
Could
now.
be.
We
I
don't
have
even
no
know. And speaking of women, this is a great question. Now, this is from
What makes you think she's a woman?
All right, we don't have time for that today. One of our audience members writes, Shop Girl is one of my favorite pieces. The writer says, what's it like from writing from a female perspective? This is signed by Donna Cirolo. Donna, where are you out there? Hi, Donna.
I have Shop Girl is actually not written from a female perspective. It's in the first person of a young man who ages during the course of the book. But Shop Girl is not either. It's a omniscient narrator, but it's closely observing a young woman.
And the same in this one. I mean,
yes,
you
it's
know
closely
a lot
observing.
about us somehow.
Well, I'm a man, and I'm quite interested. So I spend a lot of time observing women, and I've thought a lot about them, and I've been really puzzled, and there was a time when I sort of made it my business to find out about women and what they were thinking, and I never quite figured that out, but it was. But it really came in handy, and I really had long conversations with women to find out what was going on. And sometimes it's not so different from what men are thinking, too.
Question, what do you consider your best role, I guess, film role?
Role. Watching, I'll tell you something. If I write a piece of music and I listen to it, I can think, that's pretty nice. Also, because other musicians are playing and I'm listening to the melody, I think that's pretty nice. Maybe I should have changed this. If I read a passage from the book, I can go, oh, that's okay. I can be proud of that. I fix it or something. But if I'm watching myself in a movie, I think, gee, my nose looks big. It's very hard to be objective about yourself in a movie. And you can only acquire an objectivity over time or by accidentally seeing yourself on television or something, or seeing a scene. I never watch a whole movie again, ever.
You don't?
No, from the time, no. So, for example, I think on CBS, on your show this morning, I saw a little bit of Little Shop of Horrors. I thought that was pretty good.
You can sing, it turns out,
right.
too.
Well, I can talk a song. And then you showed a little clip from a funny scene from Pink Panther. That was pretty funny. And but looking back on the films, I love Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. That was a very difficult shoot, but it was delightful to work with John Candy, who was really funny. The script was fantastic with John Hughes. And I certainly enjoyed Roxanne, and I loved working with Eddie Murphy on Bowfinger. He was so funny in that. I don't know how to answer that because, the movies is like watching you. It's very hard to get an objective opinion.
Well, you've given us a lot to like over the years. And this kind of went to some of our earlier questions, but when you go back, because you've done so many things, whether it's the stand-up comedy or the film work or the music or the writing in so many different genres, do you move from one to the other because you've mastered one, or do you just get fidgety?
I don't know. I think it's just if I have an idea, it just comes, and if I have a writing idea, I think, what's the best form for it? Is it a short thing? Is it a long thing? Or sometimes just sitting at home and picking up the banjo and I go, what happened? I write songs by making mistakes. I'm playing a song and I go, what was that? And suddenly you're off on a thing. I don't know where it comes from.
One of our audience members wants to know whether you have advice for writers who are just getting started in their careers, or do you prefer not to encourage the competition?
You know, I'm such an accidental writer. I don't know what to tell people. I don't know how it works out there. If someone were asking me about performing, I would say perform every chance you get. Just make work. Perform for free, anything. And I guess the same would be true for a writer. Just write like crazy, but don't write abstractly. Write a sample newspaper story, write a sitcom, write something that has a shape that's for something, because or a book or a short story. But just don't write, shapelessly.
Along those lines, someone asked, how does a banjo player from Waco, Texas, although of course you grew up mostly in Orange County, but how does somebody become a Steve Martin and end up on the big stage and screen?
You know, I tried to answer that story in my memoir, Born Standing Up, and I tried to make it. Sometimes I read people's biographies, and they'll say, oh, and then I got an audition at the so-and-so. I go, wait a minute, how'd you go from here to get that audition? And I tried to answer that because it is little tiny steps. Sometimes it's an accident. Sometimes you meet somebody and they give you a little piece of information. It's actually too big a question to answer, but all I'd say is perseverance and putting yourself. I mean, a friend of mine said, I want to be a writer in Hollywood. This is years ago, right? And I said, well, you're living in Oregon. The first thing you have to do is come to Hollywood. You cannot be a writer in Hollywood,
Along with that, I mean, how important do you think Saturday Night Live was in building an audience? Because that's really where a lot of us really got to see you and really like you.
There were two things happening at that time. I had a record out, a comedy record out at the same time.
As I recall,
yes,
you
it
won a
did.
Grammy too.
But and that's the reason I got on Saturday Night Live as a host. And I was playing to about audiences of maybe 3,500 at the time. And it was, what do they call that? Synergy. And so I went on and hosted Saturday Night Live, and I had a show the next night in Louisiana, I think it was. And so I'm ready to go on. I said, how many people are out there? They said, 7,000. I said, 7,000? And I was, I was still learning how to play to 3,500. It's 7,000. And I walked out, and there was this cheer, like, it scared me. And I realized that then I understood the power of SNL and television and everything, and it just completely changed everything.
Do you think that things are harder or easier now for young comedians, given that there's cable out there? And who are some of the young comedians? This is a question from one of our audience members. Who are some of your favorite young comedians today?
Well, I'm out of contact a lot with comedy. I did see a show. Joel McHale did a comedy show at Carnegie Hall. I thought he was very funny, and unfortunately, I can't remember the opening acts. There were two opening acts that were quite funny, but I can't remember their names. They were very, very good. And this is horrible, but I can't remember their names. But sorry, the first part of the question was
do you think it's easier now
easier.
because
Well,
of cable and there's a comedy channel?
It's so double-edged because now, yes, there's more opportunity to be seen, but it's harder to distinguish yourself because you're like 100 comedians. How do you? I don't know what I would do because every base is covered. Absurd, somebody's doing that. Somebody's doing stories about home. Someone's, doing how crazy the airlines are. So
you have to be tough. You always had to be tough to make it in this business, I guess.
I guess so. But it was a little easier for me because there was just a dearth of comedians when I first started.
Very sweet question from someone saying, I'm about to embark on a new career teaching fifth grade students as an author of children's books. And we didn't even mention that, but I just read your children's book to my 6-month-old grandson, Teddy, so that he could get used to hearing funny things early. Do you have any advice for somebody who will be teaching fifth graders about how to engage them?
Closest I got to a fifth grader is a dog. So I have no idea about that. I'm sorry I can't help you.
And this is our last audience question because we promised to wind up before too long, but I love this one. Do you watch Sunday Morning?
Absolutely. It's on my, my DVR, and then I make discs and sell them on the street.
I promised you a smart, wonderful audience.
Yes, I got
think I
one.
delivered.
Yeah.
You delivered to us. And Steve, I want to leave you with the last word because one of the things that I have heard you talk about in terms of appreciating art is one of your favorite lines from the great artist, your friend Ed Ruscha. So let's leave them with that.
Oh, yes. I've heard, I should check this with Ed, make sure he said it, but I heard that he said it. He said, bad art, you look at and you say, wow, huh? And good art, you say, huh? Wow.
Thank you all very much. If you'll head out that way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. This is great.